Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Wine Time Yakima. We're here at the Yakima Visitor Centre, and we always want to say a very big thank you to them and to Adam, who runs the centre, and for having us here again today. It's a really beautiful facility, and we're sitting here today having a nice cup of British tea rather than a glass of wine. PG Tips, actually. You'll need to Google that because that's a very well-known brand, because we're here with Hanan. Did I get that right, Karen?
You did, perfectly, thank you.
Now, most Americans, I think, would probably say Karen, but Karen is actually from, you were saying earlier, from a German pronunciation, or maybe the Irish in you.
It is, yeah, no, I think people will know that I'm a Brit pretty much as soon as I open my mouth, a bit like you. But my mother lived in Germany long enough to pick up the name Karen, which is the pronunciation in Germany, but also in Scandinavia. I have a sister who lives in Norway, so no problem over there. It's Karen all the way.
And Karen, you're the Executive Director of Arts WA, which is the Washington State Arts Commission.
I am, yeah. I've been there since 2014. Mm-hmm. I had the privilege of being appointed by Governor Inslee to serve in that role. And so now it's almost, 11 years and counting. At the State Arts Agency. Yes.
Well, we're going to talk about the agency, but I want to know about your journey from the south of England, I think you were saying, to Washington and to Olympia, and now today here in Yakima as our guest. But we'll have some tea first. So are you a tea drinker?
Oh, I am a tea drinker. I'm not even sure you can be a Brit and not be a tea drinker.
I think you're right.
So yes, absolutely.
And I haven't had PG Tips for a long time, so that's really nice. So thank you, Adam, for providing us with some British tea today.
Perfect.
That's really nice.
So yeah, my journey.
Yes.
Well, it was a bit sort of circuitous, I suppose you would say. So I grew up in the south of England. My dad was actually Irish. He was from Galway. My mother was English. But me, my siblings and so on, we all grew up in England. Mm-hmm. And went to university and so on up in the north of England, lived in London for a while, which I know is where you're from. Yes. And then I ended up working in Venezuela as a teacher. My degree was in languages and sociology, not in the arts. You might think so, but no. So I ended up in Venezuela teaching, and then from there we spent some time in Canada. And so my future husband at that point was sort of in the picture. Then on up to Alaska, and there my husband-to-be discovered commercial fishing. And we then moved to Hawaii, and I got into small business there. I developed an alternative healthcare center, which had shiatsu therapy and acupuncture and yoga and things like that. And then after 10 years in Hawaii, we decided we were going to move to the West Coast. And we identified Washington State. We moved here. I then got into the arts. That was in the 90s. Got back into the arts, which was always what I wanted to do, just never really thought you could actually do that as a job. But, Washington State, I found you actually could. And, here we are today.
Now, are you actually an artist yourself, or is it's just a passion?
I play the guitar a little bit, but not so you'd put me on a stage or anything, more than playing in folk clubs and so on. Growing up, did that. But I've always been on the presenting side, the creative side of the arts. So when we first moved to Washington State, living on the Olympic Peninsula, and actually I split my time between Olympia, where the agency and the state government is, and Port Angeles out on the Olympic Peninsula. But I started a festival organization there called the Juan de Fuca Festival. The Straits of Juan de Fuca divide the peninsula from Canada. And that is still going today, but I started it with the idea of showcasing the best of the peninsula's arts on stage and then bringing the world in to the peninsula as well. So it became a multicultural 4-day festival over Memorial Day weekend. It's still going today. And then it went from there to increasingly doing more shows during the year and educational outreach and all kinds of things. So I did that for 7 years, and then I worked regionally in the performing arts. I ran an organization called Arts Northwest, and that is the service organization for the performing arts in the Northwestern region. And I did that for a decade, I think, until I was appointed to the State Arts Commission by the governor, and that's where I still am.
Now, I want to ask, before we start talking about your current work, do you get people thinking that you're Australian?
Oh, all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, all the time.
Me too.
But if you put me next to an Aussie or you, we actually would sound quite different.
Oh, completely. I don't understand it. But then I've recently I think my accent has changed as well, and my hearing of accents, because I now will meet a Brit and I think, oh, are they Australian? So maybe it's something, just the way your hearing changes. I don't know.
Maybe it is, yeah. I do think if we had an Aussie in here right now, probably they would be rather insulted that we called them a Brit, whereas I don't really care.
No, I don't either. It actually makes me laugh.
Yeah.
But we occasionally get emails at the station saying, will you get rid of that Aussie? And I just write back and say, we don't have one.
He's gone already.
Exactly. So Karen, you've had this fascinating journey, but you've done so many different things. Tell us a little bit about what the Washington State Arts Commission actually does, because I think arts is something that impacts all of our lives and enriches all of our lives, but it's something that's sort of, in a way, invisible. It's something that just happens, but it happens because of organisations like yours.
Yes, yeah, and I'm not sure it's invisible. I mean, just look around this beautiful visitor centre, and you've got, you have paintings on the wall, you have designer mugs and all kinds of things. You have wine with beautiful labels. That's all the arts, that's all the creative economy. So, I mean, yes, it's sort of pictures on the wall, but it's so much more than that. And I think it inhabits, every aspect of our lives, whether it's our kids going to school and bringing back, the artwork they did that goes on to become something a little more sophisticated, or maybe they join the school band or the school orchestra, or whatever it might be. The arts, I think, are present, as they rightly should be, in every aspect of our lives. And fun fact is that the creative economy, which basically embodies everything that you would think about, festivals and theaters and art galleries and so on, but it's also things like game design and so on, Nintendo games or whatever it might be. But our creative economy in the state is almost 10% of our state's GDP. So it is enormous, and that is the largest in the country. So it's a very large part of our economy. So, the job of the State Arts Commission is to be, our tagline is to be a catalyst for the arts and the creative economy. So everything we do is about supporting communities in, their local arts and cultural and creative endeavors. So, here in Yakima, you have, say, the Capitol Theatre. So we support the Capitol Theatre and the kind of work they do, or that's what we aim to do. We also have a program called WA Cultures, which we run in partnership with Humanities Washington. And that is all about things like apprenticeship programs. So a master creator or artist can then have an apprentice to keep those traditions and cultural or artistic sort of activities going. We run legacy programs and the more traditional programs like simple grant programs or arts in education programs. We also have newer programs now called various ones. So we have one called Wellness Arts in the Military, which is all around working with our military connected populations around arts and health and well-being and building community. In fact, we were just out here a few weeks ago for the Serving Those Who Serve conference. Right. And, we, the Arts Commission, are part of the organization of that. Because, again, the arts are such a big part, especially around health and well-being. We have a newer program called our Tribal Cultural Affairs Program, which allows us to support the arts and culture of our 29 federally recognized tribes. And that has been such a successful program in terms of building connections. I have several tribal leads who run that program for us. And we're now engaging with all 29 of the tribes, which has been just such a satisfying and positive expansion, I think, to the work of the agency. Our Creative District Certification Program, Yakima is working on that, Tyerton is working on that. We have 22 creative districts around the state, and it's basically a very strong, robust community planning process that brings all voices to the table to try and identify an area. I think yours eventually will be somewhere around the downtown, kind of characterized by a lot of cultural and creative activity, becomes a sort of hub that then attracts creative businesses and tourists and people who just want to go be part of a creative district. So that's what we do.
That's a wonderful concept. So how will that? Let's just say it happens in Yakima. How would that manifest itself in having a creative hub in the heart of our city?
Well, I think it will be transformative. Number one, so the role of the Arts Commission there is to help the community build the sort of the community committee, if you will, often connected to the city government, or it might be a non-profit that's leading it, but somewhere along the line, all the people come together to try and figure out what will that look like in Yakima, for example. So you have several galleries, you have a Capitol Theatre, you have other things going on, so they would be sort of the hubs or the anchors, but then the idea is, so what does this look like in 5 years? How do we plan for 10 years? And how can we bring in, for example, maybe live workspace for artists or artist housing, and as soon as you bring artist housing into, say the downtown of Yakima, suppose you had artist housing for, say, I don't know, 30 studios or something. Now you've got 30 creatives right in the middle of your downtown, and that creativity and vibe just kind of follows.
Oh, that makes great sense.
And you see this in places like Everett, for example, where you have the Shack Art Center, and above that is artist housing, is low-income housing, for which unfortunately a lot of artists are low-income. But that part of their downtown has been transformed by this. So it's a really good way for communities not just to transform, but to make it a Yakima transformation. It'll be what is Yakima all about? Because Yakima is not Everett, is not Seattle, and Seattle is not Yakima, and so on. So we try and tease that out as we're working this process with the locals. So it's a local process, but we come in as the state to offer a helping hand.
So I imagine you're spending a lot of time traversing the state, going to different communities, going to different areas.
A fair bit, but luckily I have a staff member who focuses only on creative districts.
Gotcha.
Aaron Seema, he's doing a fantastic job. But yes, he is traversing the state. I do, but I do it to talk about things like this. And then when somebody says, "Oh, we need to learn more about that thing," then I can point them to the staff member or to the part of our website that really sort of tells you more. Our website is a wealth of information.
Okay. Now, the City of Yakima just launched a new, it's an ongoing program, but just this last weekend, actually, it was on Friday night, they have this windows area where they choose different artists to display. Is ArtsWire involved in that? I don't think you are.
We're not involved directly, but I believe at least one or two of my board members who are governor appointed to the commission, Noel Moxley, I believe, is involved in that.
Yes.
And in fact, I was admiring them yesterday with her as we walked down your main street, because otherwise they would be empty.
Absolutely.
And as it is, it makes it look like, okay, this is pretty vibrant. And the more people perceive of somewhere as vibrant, the more they might want to be part of it.
But we covered the opening of that last week, because they rotate the artists.
Yeah.
I think once a year actually it is, and they've just launched the new ones. But we get a lot of negative criticism, and I wonder how you react to this, with people saying, we have this budget crisis, you're taxing us too much, why are you wasting money on things like this? How do you react to that? Because knowing as you do, and your passion that arts is so important to our community, but how do you counter that argument that there are better things to spend their tax dollars on?
Well, I think I would start by looking at the creative economy of Yakima, which is pretty high, but it could be a lot higher. So here you have a program that is a small investment that is very likely to have a much bigger return on investment. So I think it makes dollars and cents, number one. But then there's also the sort of feeling when you come in as a visitor. So I'm staying in your downtown because I'm here for several days doing this and other visits and so on. It makes me feel differently about your downtown. As I walk along, it feels friendly, it feels welcoming. I stop and I look at the artwork, and I'm not the only one. I see other people doing this. Whereas if the alternative is you have maybe a blank storefront, and that is a kind of a sad sort of depiction of your downtown, so this is a really small investment to have something that really does make your downtown feel and look differently, and that then translates, I think, into a bigger potential for more investment. Maybe those businesses start to come back, and ultimately it builds a sense of community, and you're also supporting small businesses, which are artists. So to me, it's a win-win all the way, and I can bet you it is not very large in terms of the dollar investment. I wish it was more, but I bet it isn't very much, and I bet it's worth every penny.
I think you're right, and it's interesting because we've just gone through a big tax increase with the county in terms of property taxes, and I think the current governor is not that popular in this area, and he's seen as a very high taxing governor. People are always complaining about the tax on gas prices, etc., things. But from your perspective, obviously the way that arts really impacts people's lives is sometimes invisible. But you're right in terms of the return as well. That's because if Yakima can generate tourism by people wanting to come here and experience the beauty of downtown, etc., or whatever it is, even just come to the theatre, it's a big impact on the local economy.
Absolutely, it is, and I think you're right when you say it can be invisible. But I think I always find whenever you start talking to somebody, whoever it might be, people have a connection to the arts. People will often say, "Oh, I'm not creative," but then you start to dig a little bit. Yes. What are they reading, for example? Maybe they like to. What shows do you like to go to? What do your kids do? And somewhere along the line, there's a connection there. And I think the arts as something to build community, make a place feel livable and welcoming. There's nothing like the arts for that. There really isn't. And I think your downtown is a really good example of that right now.
I think you're right. So what is the future for the organisation? Where do you see your role going? Where do you see further development throughout the state, perhaps impacting Yakima again?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot going on. It's a difficult time for everybody in terms of budget, whether it's federal or state. So I think right now we're hanging on to all the programs we have, many of which are already impacting Yakima. We don't see a massive expansion over the next year or so, but we do see the potential for maintaining what we've got and continuing the good work. But having said that, we're also working on several fronts to do some things around a ticketing bill. We're looking at that to help put the rule of law around the ticket bots and the ways that some of the tickets, for example, at Capitol Theatre, are being resold by what looks like the Capitol Theatre, but the price is now 3, 4, 5 times as much as it should be. So we're working with our sector to try and help on those levels. We're also doing work around something called a social arts prescribing, which would allow our medical field, anybody who prescribes medicine, to prescribe a dose of arts, perhaps, instead of perhaps an antidepressant, to address things like the epidemic of loneliness that we have in our country. To work with people, suffering trauma, and a dose of arts, which has been done in the UK, by the way, for decades, and is now being done across the country in places like Massachusetts, and very successfully, bringing people out of their houses to have an arts experience instead of, maybe taking a drug, but nothing wrong with drugs in their place, of course, but this is an alternative. So we are working actively with partners on that. So those kinds of things we can do all the time.
And those things really do have a big impact on people's mental health and their physical well-being.
They do, absolutely. And it's something there's no side effect beyond things like joy or building community. And maybe once you're done with your prescription, you just carry on doing it. Maybe you've joined. We see this with the veterans all the time. Maybe you've joined a jam session, even though you didn't know how to play anything. But you were just given a drum. And now you've got a community that's with you, and perhaps now you learn an instrument or whatever it might be. But your life is improved because of this.
Well, my mother she was always a very good painter, but she joined a watercolor class, I think, when she was in her late 70s, maybe into her 80s, and she had a wonderful time because it just gave her an hour each week where she was meeting other people with the same interest.
Exactly, and you're doing something creative.
Exactly.
So there's just no downside to it that I can see.
Now, were you in situ before COVID, or did you come into this role after the COVID?
I started in 2014, so
right.
I was, 4 or 5 years into it.
Because that must have had a detrimental effect on what everybody was doing, because there were things like painting clubs and book clubs and other things where people were socializing around the arts, and all of that disappeared. Have you seen that come back?
So yes, COVID was a really interesting, kind of transformative time for us all, right? Things did much of it went online, and a lot of it did not shut down, but the in-person thing did, and that was huge. So I think we've seen it return, but differently. It's kind of interesting, John. So some of the audiences are not back altogether. People got used to doing things more online and so on.
Right.
So there is still that kind of sort of lingering effect, I think. So, our local theaters and so on have had a hard time rebounding. Our museums, our galleries and so on. So it really is not smooth sailing. They've come back, and, we are always a creative sector. So we somehow endure, but it's not an easy time. I would say it's not an easy time. So I would say to all your viewers, please support your local arts organizations. Go to the theater, go to the gallery. Not only will you have a good time, but you'll also support your small businesses, your community, on so many levels. So, that would be great if people would do that.
Oh, definitely. And, KIMA, we actually do support the Capitol Theatre for the Capitol Best season. We also support the Yakima Symphony Orchestra, and they've got so there's lots of different programs going on that we're involved with that we certainly encourage our viewers to attend. So Karen, most people take the arts as their hobby or whatever. This is your job, so what do you do to unwind and relax? Do you do accounting?
Right. No, I definitely don't do accounting. Luckily, I have a great team that does, running a state budget is not your basic accounting trip, but, I have a great team who can help with all that.
But how do you relax when arts
How
is
do I
actually your
relax?
work?
Well, arts is my work. Well, I do love to play my guitar and to sort of, make a little music and so on. But I also love to walk. I love to be outside. Love to be with the family and friends. Somewhat sort of maybe somewhat typical things. But if going for a walk, getting out in nature, we live in a beautiful state.
Yes.
I also love to travel. I love to go back to the UK when I can and see the family there and friends and so on. Still do.
In the same part of England?
Same part of England and various other parts as well. But so I try, but I love my job. I love what we do, even though it's a challenging job. We never have enough money. Maybe every sector can say that. Well, we can really say that. But yet we're creative as a sector. We find ways to do things to keep our sector going. And, the joy of seeing an audience connect with an artist on stage, for example, or seeing a beautiful piece of art or making some beautiful piece of art, it makes it all worth it, and I hope that we carry on with a robust sort of arts and education approach for our kids, because there's nothing like it, to have that. And if we want to build a creative future, for ourselves as a country, keeping the arts front and center is a pretty easy way to do that.
That's very true. And so you don't mind the rain because you're used to it.
I'm used to the rain. Yes, I have no problems with the rain. I kind of love to come to Yakima and see the sun. Nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. Well, Karen, we're going to end with, as we always do, with a couple of either-or questions, just a bit of fun. Although you were telling me earlier that Governor Inslee asked you when he first met you, go for it.
Yes, the first time, I was appointed by the governor, so thank you very much, but it took me a little bit of time to actually meet him and sit down with him. So when I was told, okay, you come up and, this is your moment. So I walked in and he walked over and took my hand. He said, so nice to meet you, Karen. And then he said, and who is your favorite Beatle? And I said, oh, Paul. And I could see his face went sort of like, and I said, you look like my husband. I bet you're a John guy. And he said, I'm a John guy. But then we went on to sort of talk about whatever we went on to. But it was a great icebreaker.
Absolutely.
And he'd obviously been told she's a Brit, so that would be the question to ask Karen.
Well, at least you didn't ask her who your favourite Bee Gee was.
Right, exactly.
Karen,
there you go.
The tea. I've been talking to you.
Oh, the tea is good. I'll have a sip while you line up with the either or.
Alrighty, so first one off. A king or a president?
A president.
You think? You're not a monarchist?
I would qualify that by saying it's much cheaper to run a king, and as a figurehead, they're much more sort of a little bit more constrained, perhaps. So, but democratically, a president.
You'll go for a president.
Yeah.
Well, how does this one work then? Diana or Camilla?
Diana. Mm-hmm. And not really for any particular reason beyond, she was a bit of a tragic character. She could have been a Marilyn Monroe if she'd come into the arts world. But you know, seemed like a very genuinely committed person. I have no problem with Camilla either, but if I had to pick one, that's a hard choice. I guess I'd go for Diana.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Well, this is I'm going to ask you anyway. Genuinely, Mick Jagger or Paul McCartney?
Oh God, I'm going for Paul. You know, my son's name is Brendan. His middle name is Paul.
Oh, okay. Was it named after McCartney?
Partly, yes. He's named after, and Paul Simon. We'll throw Paul Simon in there too. But and I also happen to like the name Paul. But Paul McCartney, yep.
He's a lot more restrained than Jagger. Are they the same age? I guess they probably are.
They're close, and you know, Mick is a heck of a performer too. They're both amazing. But if I had to pick one, you know, to have tea with first of all, I'm going for Paul
I'll tell you a funny story about McCartney after we've finished. So, how about a rekindled friendship or a rekindled romance?
A rekindled friendship, I think, because they're sort of really always forever. Yeah, I would also hope I haven't. You know, I hope all my friendships are there, but to be able to rebuild them because of more connection or because, you know, we see somebody again, I love that.
Yes.
I love that.
That's nice. And finally, having success or having happiness?
Having happiness is success.
Yes. Yeah, that's not an either or really. I think
It really
you should
isn't.
have both.
Yeah, you know, but I think, you know, if I had to look at my kids or family or friends, I would wish them happiness because that indeed would be success.
Okay. Well, Karen, this has been an absolute delight. Real pleasure to meet you. In fact, we did a feature when you came out for the Veterans event a few months ago. We interviewed you for that, and that's when I thought, well, I'd love to have Karen in for a cup of tea, actually, or a glass of wine, whichever. But we've had a cup of tea today.
We have, but you know, that glass of wine, a rain check on that.
Oh yeah, we'll
too.
do that next time. Yeah. Well, a delight to meet you. Thank you, Karen. And I want to say thank you to the Yakima Visitor Centre and to Adam and his colleagues for hosting us again today. It's always a pleasure to be in their beautiful facility. Also want to say a very big thank you to our producer, Maddie Madden. Join us again for another Wine Time Yakima on Saturday at 7 p.m. next week. We've got a lot of very exciting guests coming up in the future, but Karen, absolute delight. So nice to meet you.
Thank you, John.
And give my regards to Australia.
Thank you.